When we last left our heroes, they had just rescued an airship from goblins that had taken it over, and they returned it to the gnomes that had previously owned it. And now they have a way to catch up to the prisoners that are on their way to Waterdeep. If they don't get there in time, these prisoners are going to be kind of brought into this army that the king is marshaling so that he can take over the north again. But at the same time, as they had finished rescuing the airship, the druid and the warlock started having a disagreement, and the warlock said no to the druid, which activates one of his curses. Now the druid sees all red, and the only thing he wants to do is kill the warlock. Our PvP starts with the druid and the warlock rolling initiative, and the warlock gets a little bit higher, so instantly what first thing he does is he casts darkness on the battlefield. Now that nobody can see anything, he's hopeful that the druid won't be able to spot him. But the druid has some tricks up his sleeves too. Unbeknownst to everyone else, the night before, he reached into the evil book and drew another dark secret out of it. This one was from Syriac the Hellhound Whisperer. And instantly, he calls two hellhounds from the ground, and they come up, and now they're at his beck and call, and he sicks them on the warlock. And since they have incredible smell, they don't have to rely on their sight in darkness. They start attacking him. Now the warlock, not wanting to hurt his friend but also not wanting to die, decides to pull a pretty risky maneuver. As he's dropping darkness, he also casts an illusion on himself to make it seem like he has died, like the dogs have attacked him and killed him. So he's trying to feign death so that when the druid sees him, he can get knocked out of this curse because he feels like he fulfilled his duty. As the darkness moves out of the way, the druid looks onto the battlefield and he sees the lifeless form of his friend. And he rolls a perception check, and he rolls pretty low, so he thinks that he has killed his friend. And suddenly, the curtain lifts, and he can suddenly see and control his actions again, and he looks down in horror of what he's done. Not being able to live with himself, the guilt overwhelming him, he decides to run towards the cliff and try and kill himself. And at this point, the other party members are jumping in and they're trying to help him. They're trying to grab onto him and restrain him so that the warlock can come back and he can show him that he was alive all along. The other friends are able to restrain him, and then they hold him down, and the warlock approaches, and they have kind of a heart-to-heart telling him that this book that he has, it's consumed him. The power is too much for him to handle, and the more and more he delves into it, the more and more he moves farther away from the rest of the group. And they tell him if that he can't get control over it, that he won't be able to travel with them anymore. And it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. The rogue, in his curiosity, asks if he can see the book, and he casts Identify on it. And as he touches it, another mind touches his. Something from the book reaches out, and it tells him that if he continues, if he pursues, the book will try and consume him too. So everyone knows this is not a good book, and something that they're definitely going to have to keep track of, and hopefully, the druid doesn't continue to use it. We'll see. After the fight, they've now gotten on top of the airship and they're about to depart towards Waterdeep. But the cleric tells them that he doesn't want to go back to that army, the same ones that made him a prisoner. So he decides to stay in Orlane and try and help out with this community the best that he can. But he gives them some information before they take off. He tells them 3 different things. The first is that there is a general that is in charge of this army called the Lord's Alliance. And this general's name is General Terrace. And a lot of his men are pretty afraid of him because the rumor is that he can control spirits. And that's how he, gathers his force and he attacks his enemies. So now they gotta look out for this thing. And then he tells them a little bit about his experience when he was brought into the Lord's Alliance, and tells them that there's a training facility outside of Waterdeep's walls that they might be held in if they've already made it to the city. So there's still hope that they can break them out if necessary. The party members say their goodbye and they jump onto the airship and they take off. Before so, they reach into their ear and they pull out that psychic squid and they throw it down onto the ground. And now they're airborne. Mousetrap comes over to them and he tells them that it's probably going to take about 2 days to get to Waterdeep, so they've got some time to waste if they want to. And so they all decide to do a couple of their own little things. The ranger puts out her bow in order to recharge it, and she realizes that it's a full moon, as she does. And as she's putting it out, another sigil just shows up magically on the bow. And so now she can shoot even more people at the same time. The rogue, seeing that it's also a full moon, pulls out a bottle and he tries to catch a little mist from a cloud because it's one of the ingredients he needs in order to turn his animal companion into one of his magical familiars. So now he's about halfway there. And at the same time, all the other crew of this airship, they pass the time by playing kind of a gambling game called Baldur's Bones, where it's very similar to 21 with dice. And so all the other party members jump in too, and they want to see, like, take their hand at gambling as well. And the warlock decides to teach the troglodyte baby how to gamble, and he gives him his first sip of alcoholic beverage, very much solidifying himself as the cool uncle of the group. In their gambling competition, they end up winning 2 magical items. One of them is a coin called the All or Nothing coin. And if you flip it, if it lands on tails, you get a natural 1. If you lands on heads, then you get a natural 20. And the second item is a tuning fork, that whenever it's struck, it will open up any locks that are nearby. But it only has a couple uses and then it crumbles to dust, so they have to use it wisely. After about 2 days, they show up in the middle of the night just outside the reaches of Waterdeep, and they can see the giant towering walls of this massive city, bigger than they've ever seen before, the capital. And outside, they do see what looks like a barracks or a training grounds where a lot of the Lord's Alliance soldiers are set up. So now they need to figure out a way in order to infiltrate that training grounds, try and find the prisoners, and break them out. So now we got a prison break situation. Before they depart the airship, the gnome leader, Mousetrap, he gives them an item that's his personal belongings. It's this messenger bag, and he tells them that it's a very important magical item in the realm, that it will allow you to send messages instantaneously to different people who also have this messenger bag. And so all you really have to do is to come up with, like, an address for people to send it to. And so the ranger takes it, and she immediately comes up with, like, a hotmail.com address. I think it was like SparkyRanger43 at Faerun.Fae. So the party members crouch down and they survey the area and try to get a lay of the land so that they can come up with a plan on how to infiltrate this barracks, this training grounds of all these soldiers. Everyone comes up with their own individual idea, and they put it together into this conglomeration of different subterfuge in order to make their way in. The warlock decides to create an illusion that hobgoblins are starting to come over and they're going to attack the front of this barracks so that it can lead all the soldiers to the front to try and defend themselves. The ranger uses an item that she picked up in the dungeon, which is a vial of paint. And she learned from the gnomes that it's called a paint of disintegration. When you create a shape, it disintegrates what's in the middle of that shape. So she uses that in order to create this hole inside of the wall so that she can crawl into it along with someone else, the rogue. The druid, he decides to turn into a bird, and he flies into the enemy camp. And when he's in there, he gets to the stables with the horses, and he turns into a horse, and he tries to convince the other horses to lead like a horse rebellion. So they break out and they create a lot of mischief. And then the rogue decides to go over to where the slave pens are, and there's a pit that's dug into the ground with a gate above it. And he breaks in and he tries to pick all the locks so that all the shackles are off of the prisoners so that he can help them make their escape. As the illusion is getting a lot of attention at the front of the barracks, the ranger makes her way towards what looks like a commander's tent. And when she gets inside, she sees the blacksmith from their very first adventure. He's tied up and he's pretty bloodied, and it looks like he's been interrogated. And when she questions him what happened, he says that he has family up in the north in Neverwinter, and so the soldiers believe that he might be a spy, so they were asking him for questions. At the same time, as she's kind of releasing him from his binds, she looks over at a table and she finds a lot of different pieces of parchment, some notes to like a lot of the generals. She finds one that says that in a couple days, the army, the Lord's Alliance, is going to march on a northern city called Helm's Hold, and then they're going to detonate something called a companion device above the city in order to show their strength. And so you Descent of Avernus people, I think you know what's coming up next. The ranger starts pocketing a lot of this information, and she helps the blacksmith up, and then she starts to hear a commotion coming from the camp. It sounds like the jig is up, and the plan that they have is going south. The horses are starting to get captured, and at the same time, the guards believe that the hobgoblins aren't real. They think that they're an illusion, so they start to sound the alarm. So she runs with the blacksmith into the slave pit, along with a rogue, and she starts looking around for somewhere that they can escape. And she finds a grate that leads into a sewer, and she pries it up. At the same time, the druid, who's in a horse form, he runs over to where the warlock is and he transforms back into his human form or his elf form, and now they're back to back, and they've got circles of guards that are coming over and pointing their spears directly at them, and they're about to attack. And so at this point, the warlock grabs onto the druid, and he casts one of his new spells, Thunderstep, in order to teleport out of there and do massive force damage against everyone who's left in its wake. The rogue and the warlock teleport into the slave pen, and they start looking around trying to help out the best that they can. And so the rogue, he's using the tuning fork that he just got in order to rescue all these prisoners and unlock a lot of their shackles. And then the last time he hits the tuning fork, it disintegrates, its last use already used up. And so they start ushering forward all these prisoners down into the sewer grate. And as they are, all the other party members jump in as well. The rogue stays behind because he wants to make sure that he's holding up the rear and that everyone else is safe. And as he stays behind, he starts to see something. It looks like monstrous shadows that are gliding onto the walls. They're coming towards him. So he vanishes his short sword and he starts to attack, but he doesn't hit anything. He just hits darkness. And then the shadows, he can see in the reflection of the light that they're grabbing onto his shadow and they're pulling out knives and they are trying to saw his shadow off of his body. It's very like Peter Pan-esque. And so he reaches down and he grabs onto the brooch that he got in the previous session and he uses it, the brooch of blinding, and he creates this sharp light inside of this slave pen. And the light is so bright that it scares the shadows off and they try to retreat. And as he does, he jumps into the sewer grate head first, trying to get away. And that's where we ended session 3. Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this, reach out and maybe I can help you find a game of your own or get some resources to get a game started. Tune in next time and we'll probably learn a little bit more about what happens now that they're in the sewers of Waterdeep, the capital. Everyone be safe out there. Bye now.